welcome to the Tales of the Cold North, our recap of our adventures in our Dungeons and Dragons campaign featuring members of the Wisco Dice Tabletop Gaming Podcast.
Welcome back to Tales from the Cold North. It is a D&D podcast. Welcome to episode 5. Today I'm joined by a few special guests. I am Matt. Our illustrious leader Ben is not able to make it today. I play the character Eonros, the half-elf monk.
Hi, this is Justin. I play Koth, the half-orc paladin.
And this is Jason. I play Lyndall, the halfling rogue.
Other characters of note that we have in this campaign, we have Rika, a halfling druid, Swifty, the human wizard, and Deacon, the half-elf sorcerer. So as I said, this is episode 5. Today is January 18th, 2022, and on this episode, we're going to be covering session 8. So we always start off our sessions every time we meet with some quick Dungeon Master tips. And I took a few notes. Our leader this time, he shared a couple of quick tips. One, he said, sometimes when you're speaking in character, it's always good to add a little bit of an inner monologue to your discussion because it may help other characters understand where you're coming from. Because sometimes we take an action and it confuses the other players because they don't really understand where it's, where your head's at or some of that internal struggle you may be dealing with as a character. So it would be sort of like if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings and you've seen Gimli, somebody might say Gimli just doesn't trust this person because they're an elf, because we can't see the person acting it sometimes. So we get a little bit of his background and information from that inside of his head. The other thing that came up out of this episode, and we talked a little bit about this during the last episode, is crosstalk during more intense role-playing sessions. Don't be afraid when you're stuck in a more intense role-playing session where the party and whether you're going to enter combat or break down, a difficult situation. Don't be afraid to call out if you need to take a time out to step out of character. Sometimes if you're talking a bit in character and out of character, it can lead to some confusion amongst players and the GM. But consider building an agreement with the group as a whole on how you want to handle in character and out of character. Every group functions differently. Some people and some groups love to be in character the whole time. Others love to be a great mix of in character and out of character. And I think that's kind of where we live. We live in that in between where sometimes we're really in character and other times we just have a lot of really fun banter at the table. And it's sometimes difficult in those situations to tell where somebody's at. Are they in character? Or are they out of character? So just think about it, figure out as a group how you want to handle it. So that was our session tip for the day. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and dive right on in. We're going to talk about what happened in session 8. Justin, why don't you give a little recap of kind of where we left off and kind of how we started out?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So at the start of session 8, the players were out on the tundra. We had been following the great white moose that had been taken over by the druid Revizin, and we'd been following its tracks, which eventually also had some human tracks along with it, or giant wolf tracks. And we kind of are assuming at this point that we've been following Revizin, who had fled from the town that we had come from, to the north that we had come from. We just had this encounter with this massive white dragon who thankfully did not eat us and flew away, leaving us just, with a flurry of snow in the middle of the tundra. As we start out, we are planning to continue following the tracks that we've been following, but it's the tundra and it's cold, very cold out just on the kind of open, snowy plains. Most of the party gets exhausted, at least a point of exhaustion, as we are just trudging across the frozen north here. Thankfully, though, the tracks that we were following were easy to follow. Really, at this point, all the snow that was on the ground, it was more of a sort of deep furrow through the snow that we were following more than tracks. So it was not difficult at this point to follow the tracks.
I thought it was a nice touch though, and I realize it's kind of built into the campaign to see how cold it is, and just for the people that are listening to the podcast, I want you to understand we all pretty much live in Wisconsin. It does get cold. So we're used to the Great White North and the cold, but I envision this as it's in that 40 below with wind chills like in the 60s, and it's stuff that even up here with the right gear, we don't want to go outside. And our
Yeah.
party has been out there for hours and hours in this.
Yeah.
And
Ben takes the opportunity often, I think, when we're adventuring outside to just convey how freezing cold it is. And yeah, I agree with you, Matt. Like it's easily -40, if not colder, in there.
Yeah, and this is, obviously without sun for however long, so there's no warmth to be found. So we continue to follow these tracks, and from what we can tell, they are continuing to head in just sort of a southern direction, and we're trudging along. At some point, I think, Matt, you tried to determine how far away we were really from our quarry, and I think you made some rolls, pretty good rolls, and we were kind of had a idea that we might be an hour or so behind the moose that we were following.
Are you sure? I had
Um,
noted 4 hours behind
oh, interesting.
in my notes.
yeah, I think it was in that 1 to 4 hour range. I think it was, I got a range.
Oh, it
Oh,
says
I'm
1 to
sorry.
2 hours old. The tracks are 1 to 2 hours old. Yeah, so
Right.
I
Yeah.
noted- sorry, I noted a couple to 4 hours behind.
Yeah.
the
Interesting.
animals.
maybe we made a couple checks and it was different at different times.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
It could have been. I mean,
Yeah.
apparently we weren't particularly good with directions those days. So.
Yeah.
We did decide to trudge on and continue following, even though there was the risk of further cold and further exhaustion. And as we continued to follow, we stumbled across some undead creatures that burst out of the snow. A group of maybe 12 or 13 zombie kobolds more or less surrounded the party, just popped out of the snow, raised up out of the snow. And thankfully, the party was fairly spread out at this point. We've learned some of our lessons to not bunch up as we're traveling and keep too tight of a formation, but there were enough kobolds that they still managed to pretty much surround the entire group. So that was our first big combat. I think the lesson there was that zombies are pretty difficult to kill. They're not easy to put down. Everyone was, it was multiple rounds of everybody attacking and hitting kobolds and just dealing tons of damage, and they would not go down.
Yeah. I feel like this is a scenario where maybe even in character, out of character, however we want to do that, we've started to run into enough undead that we probably should be doing our homework, at least in character, and be like, yeah, these zombies take forever. I wonder if we can figure out what makes them go down faster. It's sort of like one of those scenarios where if you know how to deal with the monster, it's trivial, right? I mean, it wasn't like they hit that hard, but there were just so many of them. We'd be like, bam, I pounded the heck out of that one, and it just shrugged it off.
Ben had some great descriptions as we were fighting these things where, somebody would crack the thing across the head and its head would loll and like hang from its neck, and he had some great graphic descriptions during this combat, I remember.
Yeah, that was particularly fun.
At one point I did have a moment of like we started fighting these things and I had a kind of, oh yeah, I'm a paladin. Dealing with undead is kind of my thing. So it was maybe a round or two in before I was like, oh yeah, I can like turn undead and like do all this stuff that I don't normally get to do. So I think I did use some type of attack, my smite maybe, to do some radiant damage, which managed to actually kill one quickly. Can't do too many of those, unfortunately, but yeah, I did have that moment of like, oh yeah, how I'm the one that's supposed to do the stuff with the undead.
Yeah, that's the downside of when you don't get to do it all that often.
Yeah, right. I mean, Koth he's new to being a paladin. It's not like his first instinct to like, turn to his paladin powers. I think he just wants to fight. That's what he's used to, anyways.
So what you're saying is you need a level of barbarian in there somewhere.
Ooh, now that's an interesting. Maybe. Yeah. We did eventually get through the zombie kobolds, though. I don't think anyone really got hurt. Do you guys remember?
I
Not
Really didn't take
badly.
much damage.
I
Maybe
think
somebody was.
somebody needed a heal after the fight.
Brian
yeah,
took some hits. I think he maybe got even half down. Now that I think about it.
Like Lyndall might have taken a couple points
Yeah.
of damage
I
during
think
that.
I had a note here that we took a decent beating, and the only reason I said that was we couldn't really like in a traditional fight, we would keep the casters in the back. The casters could not stay away from them. So
No.
the
Yeah.
casters weren't taking a ton of damage, but they were taking like 5 here, a couple there, and
Yep.
casters don't have that much health. I mean, for those of us with fairly decent armor class, we're like, they're barely touching us, but
hmm
the clothies were having a few rough times off and on.
Yeah. I think too, it's just, because they were zombies. I mean, kobolds are supposed to be really a fodder kind of enemy. And sure, zombies might be a little tougher, but it just made the battle last that much longer. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, too, why we were actually taking damage from what should have been fairly easy encounter. But we took them out. We did it. Yay. Hooray.
It was a bit of
And
a slog.
yeah,
A
it
little
was
bit,
it was
yeah.
a fun combat. It just took, yeah.
It was.
And we continued to follow these tracks through the snow. I should say one thing I meant to mention about this combat, which I thought was cool. During the combat, we kind of had to be restricted to some degree to the path or the trough through the snow. And if you moved outside of that trough too far, basically Ben enforced that you were in like deep snow, and so your movement was severely hampered, which I thought was just a cool way to set the scene really well and say there's an area where it's easy to walk, but you get too far out of this kind of narrow trough and you're having trouble moving. So one other cool thing.
Also, just to back it up, right before that fight, when we had been pursuing, the moose and the couple wolves and Revison, we did notice her footprints changed to a wolf as we had been going on. And then I think it was also at that time, like after that exhaustion hit, I think our druid Rika, she changed into a snow fox
Yeah.
to just better deal with the harsh conditions and everything, but pretty much popped right back out of that into her normal form, like when that kobold battle started. But
Yeah.
that was cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I remember her
It's always
kind
nice
of,
when people can kind of use their abilities and make it a little bit easier on themselves.
she was kind of looking through, like originally, I think, did she say she wanted to at first turn into, something big, like a polar bear maybe or something? Brown bear?
Yeah,
And
she hadn't. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I know druids can do bigger and bigger shapes as they get higher, but her first instinct goes, "Oh, we could do polar bear." I'm like,
yeah.
no, too many hit points. You're gonna have to wait a few levels there.
Yeah, Ben had like restricted it to like you can only change into like a creature with a 1/4 challenge rating,
Challenge rating,
or
yeah.
something, I think.
I think it's level based, probably on the
True.
druid, something like
Yeah,
that.
I
Makes
believe it
sense.
is.
Makes sense.
So after that, Jason, why don't you take over for the
Sure. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, we we just continued on after actually we did apply previous lessons learned and
Right.
took a short rest.
Yep.
After that, we rested for a little while. I can't remember. We didn't make a fire, did we? Because we had no means to do so.
No, we didn't. Yeah.
But we just short rested for an hour. Like I remembered, like I didn't even recover a hit die because I hadn't taken too much damage in the combat, but I know a couple of us at least did. Get back up toward full and get a little bit of rest in, and then we continued marching on, like following these deep furrows in the snow, and trying to catch up to. It seemed a little bit hopeless to me most of the time, but just we had to go somewhere. We couldn't just hang out in the middle of nowhere, and we continued following Revizin and the other animals she was with. And all of a sudden, then up ahead of us, we see a couple flying creatures that are approaching us in the long distance, at least a good 120 or to maybe 140 feet away from us. We see these flying things that appear to have a deer's head to them. And, the DM describes these to us. They have scaled body. He didn't tell us what these were ever. So we didn't figure out exactly what they were, but these creatures with scaled bodies and this weird deer head with obsidian antlers and glowing eyes. And, they appeared aggressive. I believe that they won initiative against most of us, and just their movement was frightening with their double movement they did on their first action, because they flew up and they were just right up over pretty much the whole party. Again, we were applying lessons learned, and we were spread out a bit before this encounter started. But actually, I think Lyndall had won initiative in that, and he kind of, he felt a little bit threatened by these things. They look kind of aggressive, and we've dealt with some. His first thought when learning of these obsidian, with quotes around it, antlers, was that those antlers were made of chardalyn, that black material that we've experienced, encountered in the game previously. So he moved up and fired at them. I can't remember if there was a solid hit or not, but they flew up and were right over our party, 30 feet above us, and we were in the midst of combat then. So this was an interesting combat. It introduced some interesting mechanics for dealing with flying creatures that we were fighting, because that was kind of their default position, was up in the air 25, 30 feet above us, which for some of us, for the distance to make a ranged attack, that's about the length of how far you can go without having a disadvantage on your attack roll. I thought one cool thing about the combat was, and Matt, Janros, like, you don't really have any means of a ranged attack, right?
No.
Like, you're pretty much a straight melee character. And I thought that your strategy in that combat was great. You just readied and waited. And they were kind of hovering over you a couple different times, and just said, if they come within range of me and swoop down, I'm going to attack them. And that ended up doing some significant damage to them during that fight. That was pretty cool. They also were pretty painful when they did hit us, because there were two different attacks that they got when they swooped down on us. One was with those antlers hitting us, and then the other was either a bite or hitting us with their hooves. I can't recall exactly.
It's a talons attack.
The talons.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the idea was they would swoop down, make a charge, get you with the antlers, and then try to rake you or grab you
as they flew
with
by.
the talons on the way
Sure.
back, as they kind of went past you, which thankfully allowed Yanros to take some actual hits and swings because he was ready for them, as they swooped down. But
yeah,
I was worried that the minis that Ben had, I don't know if I was going to ask and I got distracted, but I don't know if he painted those himself. But those are some cool miniatures, and I think that they were miniatures like for those exact creatures, whatever they were pretty cool. But that was a frightening combat for Lendl. And he basically took the tactic of using his bow to make ranged attacks on them. Rika and Swifty had to kind of get up like right underneath them to be able to fire their spells at them. And Koth with the javelins. That was pretty. Didn't you threw the javelins and they actually just got stuck in them, literally, and you were down a couple of javelins from that experience.
The first one I attacked, I was like, all right, well, I think the first one I actually used the javelin. I used this sacred weapon ability to make it a little bit stronger. And what that does is it powers up your weapon for like a minute or something like that. So I've got this glowing sacred spear javelin that I just powered up. I chuck it at the thing, and then I think I played it where like as a player I was like, okay, and then I'll get my javelin back. But then like I was like, wait a minute, I'm not gonna get that back. And so I think I played it as like Koth is standing under this thing waiting for his javelin to fall, and it just doesn't because it's stuck in the stupid animal.
It was a good hit,
Yeah, I
though.
got him, but
It was, yeah.
Well, and as I recall, these monsters also had damage resistance. So we
oh,
would hit
that's
them with
right.
something, and they
They
would
did, yes.
not take as much
Yeah,
damage as
Yes.
we thought they
I
should.
think they must have been. I mean, magical damage maybe did
Yep,
full
they
damage or
seemed
something.
I had noted they seemed resistant to non-magical weapons.
Yeah.
And as you know, we're not playing a Monty Hall campaign. So we do not have a wealth of magical, weapons and all sorts of
No, we
stuff
just
yet.
have
So
4 spellcasters or whatever, but
I don't know why that would help.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think was it that one that Swifty was trying to tell jokes to
He was.
what is it? Tasha's hideous laughter.
Yeah.
I don't think that worked on them.
No, it didn't work on them.
So interestingly enough, and I actually did this the night of, I just didn't say anything. I Googled. Google is my friend. So I
Oh,
believe the creature is what's known as a periton. A periton is basically like a mix between an eagle and a deer head. So
ooh.
it's an interesting creature. So it has some
Sure.
interesting capabilities, but it's basically just like that. So that's why the GM specifically had asked us, what language are you saying it in? Because the thing can actually speak common and elvish. Oh, it can't speak. It can understand common and elvish, but it can't speak.
Oh, interesting.
So, but yeah, it's an interesting creature. I've never run into one, and I've been playing Dungeons Dragons since there was no, the original one that was released, I think, in the 70s. And so no, I didn't play it in the 70s. I wasn't. I'm not that old, but I think the original D&D was out for quite a while before they did advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So,
Maybe it's just a
anyways,
Cool.
Forgotten
Cool.
Realms type creature.
yeah, and I don't think I ever did a lot of time in the Forgotten Realms. So this is, a creature I've never run into. So
Well, that
I always love that. It's kind of neat to run into something that you're just like, oh my god, it makes me think of new tactics and how are we going to handle
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And for my character, I'm kind of like Lyndall was. I'm like feeling really kind of exposed because I'm sitting there going, these things could literally just keep strafing me till I'm dead, and I don't. I mean, I could prep an attack, which was the best I could do, but nothing I felt like I could do beyond that because I don't carry a short bow. I don't carry. I mean, I think I have a sling, but like you said, sling. I'd be at extreme range for sling when on those things. So.
You
Sure.
know, it just made me think of this, that using your kind of guard, your holding your action tactic, maybe what we should have done is just have all the melee people guard one of the casters against attack and let them fire off their stuff. And there's the one, they're the ones that can hit from range. And if we just acted as a guard for each of them and said, hold my action to protect if it attacks against them or me or whatever, that's. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did I say that right? Is it ready or is it hold?
Oh, I think it's ready.
You ready
Yeah,
in
ready.
action?
Okay.
I said it wrong.
Oh, that's just wanted to make sure I was saying it right. That is a really good idea, though. That would have been an intelligent tactical decision.
Yeah. Well, hindsight.
Well,
Yep.
it usually takes us at least 2 or 3 times of screwing it up before we
Sure.
learn, but we
Sure.
get there someday.
I mean, we were lucky with this, or I mean, maybe not lucky, but maybe they were not as strong as they appeared to be, it turned
Mhm.
out, because we didn't have too awful difficult of a time with them. I think Rika healed Janros up after the fight.
Yeah.
But at least in my notes, I don't think we rested again after that fight. But yeah, we killed the two monsters pretty easily. No massive losses or no really close calls. But we did, at least one of us checked them out after the fight, and those obsidian looking antlers were not Chardolin. So, and if that is like a more just common creature, then okay, that kind of makes sense. Then they're just obsidian. So didn't
Yeah,
Didn't one of us take the head from one of those?
I
I
believe
think we
somebody
did,
did.
yeah.
It was either the head or the
Maybe just the
antler.
antlers.
Yeah, somebody did it. I know, and I remember that distinctly.
I'll
Yeah,
have to go
so
check inventories for who's got a deer head in their inventory.
yeah. It's got to be at least a good 20 or 30 pounds. So Lindell does not have that. So yeah, after that fight, we kind of continued on the trail again. You know, we figured we're going southeast to southwest some way. But Matt, I'll hand it over to you to pick up the evening from there.
So we finally broke out onto the road and realized that apparently our pathfinding is not particularly as strong as we thought it was. After all this time, we find that we're not very far out of Caer Dinevel, which is pretty much mostly west from where we were. So apparently we didn't bother to look to our left, which is where we should have seen the giant mountain where the dwarves hang out. So we thought we were heading almost due south. We thought we were almost to, the Four Corners, which is basically a crossroads that would have put us close to one of the southern cities. But we were very off target. So we were near Caer Dineval. So from my character's perspective, I knew we were going to come up this way eventually, but I would have a little bit of, let's just say, mental time to prepare. In my character's backstory, I actually grew up in Caer Dineval. So I'm not originally from Caer Dineval, but that's where I grew up
And
because I originally was in Caer
sorry,
Conning. So
Matt. Just to mention, we hit the road and we had lost the trail at that point. We
yeah,
could not
we
follow the
couldn't figure
tracks
it out.
any further past there. Sorry, I just wanted to mention
No,
that
that's
before
a
we got
that's a
into Caer
great
Dineval.
point. So we just basically had to make a decision, and since we realized we were so far off target, we're like, it's too cold. We can't stay out here any longer. Let's just go to a town. We can figure out if we want to pick up the tracks afterward. That's a great call out, though. So we ended up in Caer Dineval, and basically we checked out the inn, but unfortunately the inn has closed due to the fact that this town is so reliant on the southern towns for business, and it's so cold. Nobody's really going up north anymore. There's no need for them to come up north. So they rely on the ferries and they rely on all these things that just flat out don't exist right now in this bitter cold. So the inn is closed. The inn was, for background information for the group, is basically a woman I had been in love with. Her father owned that inn. So the inn is closed. We went to the bar because, hey, what does every good adventuring party do when there's nothing better to do? You go to the bar and you get warm. You drink because you
Oh,
need to
we
get
needed
warm.
we
So
needed to get warm.
booze.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Just warmth that had nothing to do with the
No,
alcohol.
not at
I
all.
swear. So yeah, we ended up making our way to the bar, and I find, of course, the woman that I had been in love with a long time ago. She's actually working in this bar, so that led to some interesting scenarios. When you're going through your head and your backstory, and your backstory says, you kind of fell in love with this woman, but then you left her so that you could go chase this bigger, danger to the world. But, in your mind, you're like, oh, I've still got this kind of love in the back of your head for her. And then, there's this part of me out of character that's like, I can't tell if my character should feel like I'm coming back with more wisdom and I'm realizing she's just a flirty barmaid and I shouldn't have been that in love and enamored, or if it's just because the GM is, no offense, he's a dude, and so he's probably not as good at the flirting women to guy thing. So it was an interesting dynamic because I'm like, I'm not sure where I want to go with this right now. But we gathered some information. We got the party warm, got rid of a little. We didn't get a chance to get rid of our exhaustion because we do need to rest at this point. But we spent a bunch of time trying to figure out where we could stay, gathering information, trying to figure out what's going on in the area. We know that there's a lot of problems because The ferries shut down. I think the irony of this is we know the ferries shut down, but we know the guy who ran the ferries because we helped him out in the previous town.
Helped him out.
Yeah, helped is
Well,
it's an
I
objective
used the term
that's yeah.
loosely.
We did save his life, I
We
think.
did save his life, but also caused him some difficulties.
Just because we broke down his door and we left it so that it doesn't lock. I don't know if that counts as a, I mean, we were just trying to be helpful, I
Well,
swear.
he has a criminal record now too, so did get
Well,
arrested.
we found out that there's definitely some weirdness going on with the local speaker, but the local speaker has been known to host people. And this is a little bit of a bigger town. It's definitely not as big as some of the southern towns, but I mean, they've got their own keep and there's definitely a fortified position.
Mhm.
So, we'd heard from people in the town that it was a good place to go. So we headed over to where the speaker is, and I figured, hey, great opportunity. We've got Koth here. He's the speaker of Goodmead. Here's an opportunity for us to maybe build better relations between Goodmead and get on the good side of another speaker, as well as, I don't know, getting more.
Mhm.
We go by the keep, and yeah, look at that. It's all locked up. And we run into Bob.
Bob the guard.
Bob the gate
Yeah.
guard. I'll learn to speak sometime today. And Bob wasn't terribly helpful. I mean, Bob just kept insisting that the speaker wasn't well. They didn't need our help. We're like, guys, I brought a druid. I brought a paladin. We can heal anything. We don't need your help. Go the hell away.
Something's fishy.
Yeah, there's definitely something fishy going on there. I agree with you, Jason.
The speaker, the whole line that we were fed was that the speaker was apparently too sick to see or talk to anyone, and it's maybe been this way for a little while, from what Allie had told us, the
2 months. Yeah.
waitress. So that definitely seems odd. I agree. Something to look into.
Well, and Allie had told us that nobody had seen the speaker for 2 months, which is also when the ferry had shut down from East Haven. And yeah, their excuse was that we have our own healers. Don't come in. That was something's not right here.
And then Matt thought to kind of, I mean, you asked, you grew up here, and basically you don't know any of these guys, right?
No, that was the most interesting thing. So their head guy, I believe, was called Boss Kedroth.
Kedroth. Yep.
And what was interesting, because we asked around a little bit, is these guys were brought in to deal with they had a few attacks in the area. So these are mercenaries or something. And they were brought in to deal with, I believe they'd had some animal attacks, which I'm assuming is similar to the moose that we ran into. And they'd also had attacks from the Reghead Raiders. So the Regheads, for anybody who doesn't know this area, basically are some barbarian tribes that live up on the glaciers to the north. So they were there before this was just nothing but frozen all the time. So they're used to living on the glaciers. But this group had been brought in to deal with those attacks, and it was definitely weird because now they're like holed up in this camp and they're locked themselves into the keep, for lack of better term. So,
And also I had noted that the regheads that were attacking the town were kind of odd. They seemed, rabid almost.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that our sorcerer Deacon is a reghead.
Yes.
But from descriptions we've heard of these ones, and also at some point in the past in the campaign, like there seemed to be like these defector regheads, or I don't know if they're undead or what, but they're not quite the normal ones that Deacon is familiar with.
I think we learned about them back when we were in there was like a tomb of some ancient elves back near Goodmead that we went back to and learned a little bit about. I feel like that's where maybe even Brian was talking about these crazy versions of regheads that,
Yeah.
Well, Could have been during then, but originally I had gotten the story out of my uncle in East Haven of that's how my
Yes.
parents had
Oh,
died.
right,
They
right.
had died to Reghead Raiders, but they were kind of similar in a way to Sefik, that they had this kind of blue eyes and like very weird skin, and they weren't typical Reghead Raiders. So it's interesting though, because there's all these threads everywhere, and they're starting to stitch
A
together
little
a little
bit,
bit,
yeah.
and
Yeah. That's
we're
cool.
I feel like we're just on the tip of finding out new critical
Yeah.
information. So, we had to make a decision at that point. There's really no place to go. We can't stay at the inn. We can't stay at the captain's. So I'm gonna say in a little bit of a I feel like I had to tuck my tail a little bit and had to go back to the bar and ask the barmaid that I had been dating previously that if the whole party could stay with her. So I feel a little bit bad at this point because I'm imposing like 6 people on her and her family. So, and I know her father, I mean, he lost his job. I mean, he lost his business. So they can't have a full wealth of information or money. So we're kind of dumping on them. But, she took us in, and that's kind of where we ended the session.
With a
So,
much needed long
any
rest.
yes, with a much needed long rest. Any other points you think we missed, guys, or things you wanted to highlight from our travails inside of Care Denival?
Yeah, in terms of kind of role playing highlights, Matt, you had some good moments interacting with Allie. I thought role playing wise, where from my perspective, I felt like you had a kind of conflicted discomfort with meeting her again, and I interpreted that as like, yeah, you've had this relationship in the past, but you've moved on to these bigger and better things, and is this the right thing to
Putting
do
it
to
to like
kind
it would
Oh,
make
yeah, she
most
was really
uncomfortable.
putting it was a little uncomfortable. She's like, "Oh, I'm gonna give you guys the special drink that I know is super expensive," and she's not charging us
yeah.
for it. So I'm like, "Oh my god, I've gotta give her, like, 5 gold just to make sure that she's not putting herself in the poorhouse." Yeah,
How about you guys?
so
Any cool moments?
I as we had discussed prior to jumping on the session here, it was a different session. It was a little different for us because it was combat heavy. Those two big combats we had, they took a while. And, then we followed it up in Cardinival with a good bit of role playing and kind of figuring out where, positioning for the start of the next session really well, I feel like. But during one of those combats, so myself and Justin, the players controlling Lyndall and Koth, as humans, we outside of the game, sitting there at the table, we were talking about beer. I can't remember the details of the conversation, but it was during someone else's turn, so kind of a little bit shame on us for not being quiet and paying attention to the other player's turn. But and then one of us got attacked and hit by I think it was the kobolds
Yeah.
when this happened, and we just kind of like ended up intertwining that into the role playing of the game, and that the actual two player characters were talking about that, and we made a couple funny remarks, and I had a good laugh at that.
Yeah. Yeah, then we just decided Koth and Little we're actually talking about beer during the combat, getting a little distracted.
they were kobolds. I mean, you didn't think it could be that bad,
Yeah.
could you? Yeah, I think the highlight for me is one that you mentioned, Justin, which was really Ben's descriptions of how the zombies reacted and like the
Uh-huh.
heads, and I mean it was just so classic, like great zombie stuff, but he was just so
Yeah.
descriptive with that.
There were some
And
comical
it was just
things too that were he did an
oh, it was
awesome
just a
job.
hoot.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I had a lot of really fun like that. So, I mean, so what do you guys think about like things that we learned? I mean, sometimes we make mistakes or tips that we kind of came across with this. What are some things that you think kind of come to mind?
Yep. For me, this session was just at least some proof that we are learning from some of the mistakes we've made in the past. One that I think was a good evidence for that is when we were confronting, or when we went to go talk to the guards at the castle and they just refused to let us in. We were demanding to talk to the speaker. You know, Matt, you were kind of talking to them at that point, and I think your instinct is to go aggressive with those kind of situations and like, hey, we're a big, strong adventuring party. We can put our muscle to play here and get and talk these guys down. But we have had bad success with that in the past, especially in Targos when we were trying to strong arm the speaker's assistant to get an audience with the speaker of Targos. So I applaud your caution in this instance. So we learned a lesson that we can't always force our way into places, and we may have to come up with a sneakier plan or a different kind of plan for figuring out what's going on there.
Yeah, that could be a fun next
Well,
session, I think, when we figure out what we want to do there. What about you, Jason?
Kind of just expanding on what Justin had to say. It doesn't feel like we made too many mistakes in this session, right? It feels more like we better applied what we've learned. We kind of were approaching our travel in a more spread out manner. Not that I think, had we been closely grouped up in the couple combat encounters we got into, I don't think that we would have had anything adversely affect us, like when we found that banshee in the forest that knocked so many of us down. But like, it feels like that's a bit of a slightly wiser way to travel. And like I've noted here, when in doubt, rest if you can. And it's definitely something that I think we've learned from the past. And I mean, shoot, had we not rested after that kobold fight and then we continue, following the trail, and it's like, I mean, we expected to maybe run into Revizin, so like I think that maybe influenced us to rest, but I mean, we still got into an encounter, and it was a good thing that we had recovered some of our health for that. So yeah, it was a mostly mistake-free session, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think we're learning from it, and we're thinking more strategically with our characters now that we're getting new abilities. I think the thing that I took away, so this occurs to me, of course, after we're done with the session, and I was just sitting here, and the thing that I say is sometimes be more specific with your questions. And I should have stared at the map, and I should have been like, oh, I can get my bearings. And I feel like we got way off course crossing the tundra, and actually we still wanted to follow her, but we were so convinced we were heading south. And my brain says, if I just thought to ask the question, where's the damn mountain in the north? Because I know them, and I'd be like, oh, the mountain's over there, so we must be heading west. If I thought to ask more specific questions,
Sure.
I might have had a clue that we were
That's
heading
a good point.
the other
yeah.
direction. So it's just kind of one of those things. And sometimes it could be me not understanding. I know it's really cold, but that cold is probably partially from a constant blowing wind. And anybody who's lived in a very cold area will know that can really set you up for blizzard like conditions. And blizzard like conditions, I would never see the mountain anyways. So
Sure.
it's entirely possible we didn't, but I remember distinctly a few times when we were traveling, there was still wind, but it wasn't like blizzard. It was more like just cold. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to think about what you know and apply it. So if you're like, hey, there's this really giant landmark and I'm trying to figure out if we're heading north, south, east, or
Mm.
west. Well, yeah, ask about that landmark. Don't be afraid to say, I know I don't have survival, but I can figure out where the stupid mountain is.
And
So.
maybe like you can facilitate that for yourself by just stopping, kind of, close your eyes and envision, like, where am I? What's it look like around us? What's my environment look like and everything? And, it might lead you to that more specific question. That's a good
Yeah,
point, Matt.
Yep.
Yeah, so any final comments from you guys before we wrap up here tonight?
Nope. I'm
Nope.
looking forward to the next session.
Yeah.
I am excited to figure out what's going on with this speaker in this town, and if we need to sneak into the castle or figure out what to do. I think that we should come up with a cool plan coming into the next session. There's
I
a lot of
agree.
things we can do. I think I'm a little worried that we lost track of her vision, but I don't think it'll be the last we see of her. So
I don't think we'll have a problem, and she will come to us somehow. I'm sure this will happen in the future. Yeah, I think before this next session, like personally, I intend to try and like get some planning done ahead of time, like on the Discord before we actually sit down at the table, so we have some idea of a direction to go, so we don't sit there and kind of like everybody gives their opinion and options or anything. It would probably be good to kind of figure that out ahead of time a little bit, so I'm going to make an effort for that.
that is a good idea.
Yeah, at least it gives people the opportunity to throw their ideas on the table before we get there and sort of at least mull them over and think about it before we spend an hour in real time
Yeah.
doing
Yes.
that.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we're going to call that a wrap for today's episode of Tales of the Cold North. We appreciate you listening, and we look forward to sharing more of our adventures with you.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you leave a review of this show wherever your favorite place is to find podcasts. Oh, and by the way, give us a like on our Facebook page. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest while you're at it. If you haven't looked recently, make sure you catch up on the blog at wiscodice.com. Hey, Brian, what's that site?
Ah, darn, I forget. Justin, what's our website again?
Wiscodice.com.
That's right, it's wiscodice.com. And until next time, everyone, peace out.